That's life. That's life. That's what all the people say. You're riding high in April, shot down in May. But I know I'm gonna change that tune. When I'm back on top in June. I said that's life.
So we generally just hit record, just like that. And this week we got Ken Ward on, kind of staying on topic with some of the guests we've had this season with Andy Waymeyer and Manville, keeping it technical here with Ken. Ken is you said you're the education trainer for Electromedia?
For Electromedia, I'm doing technical marketing, which means I go both directions. I educate the dealers on how to use the equipment, and I also bring information back to Electromedia, specifically a lot about cars, to take that into account in developing products.
Okay.
And also
runs the Educar Facebook group, which helps a lot of techs out because from the technical side, it's just say you're working on a 2021 Ford Raptor and you know what system it has in there, you can easily post, or you should do your research first. You should search, use a little search bar up top to find your answer, because probably somebody's already posted full graphs of what every channel already looks like in the car to make your job much easier, which it's one of the Facebook groups that came along in a time when you're getting Facebook group invites every 5 seconds. But it's one of the only ones that came along and you're like, wow, this is definitely going to be useful.
It has worked out pretty well. I remember originally I was taking a lot of that information and putting it into sort of a legacy group and just offering it up as a feature of that legacy group. And then it turned out that legacy group really didn't meet the standards I was hoping for. And I decided, well, hey, I should have my own school bus, and that's how it worked out.
And we thank you for that. There is one very important rule of the group, which is no head unit talk.
No head unit replacement questions. We will talk about the output of the head unit for sure. I have had people try to walk the line and say, well, if I'm integrating the head unit with the HVAC and the illumination, aren't I integrating it? And the answer is no, not for the purposes of my group.
Audio integration.
So, and for a lot of the enthusiasts out there that are unfamiliar with Ken being not being a part of our industry, Ken had also worked with Tom in being part owner of Musicar. And that's a guest that we had on a few episodes ago. And I see Gary repping the hat over there. So what's the word that I'm looking for? An integral part of that business success. And I think, is that what led you to doing the Educar stuff? Being able to work on a lot of the highly technical cars that a lot of people always have questions about?
Yes and no. I think one of the reasons that Tom and I got together and started Musicar was because we worked on some projects with using OEM head units, and we got results that no one else had created before. And Tom was impressed with the fact that we knew how to measure the signal coming out of the head unit and determine how successful we were going to be. And I wish I could say that with every car I fulfilled his expectations from that first car we did. I don't know that I always did, but we decided that those results were good enough to base a business on. And so Musicar from day one was intended to do great sound, whether you replace the radio or not. We actually ended up replacing more radios than we ever expected because CarPlay came along. And as we know, CarPlay was kind of a big bump in the snake for replacing radios, but now CarPlay comes in almost everything, and I think that bump is the tide's going out a little bit.
You know, it's hilarious. Just to stay on topic, we have a Rolls Royce in the shop right now that wants CarPlay. Yeah.
And we
So
see
that's
those
fun.
Porsches that got CarPlay on a tiny little screen with a single DIN just so they could have it. But yeah, that was. And then you asked about Educar. The the reason that Educar started, as far as me doing training classes, which I've done at a lot of our conventions, and I've seen you guys at those conventions, was because my son, who was about 3 or 4, was watching Yo Gabba Gabba, and they had the talent show episode. And he said, "Dad, what's a talent?" And I said, "It's something you're good at, you enjoy doing." Well, does everybody have a talent? Yeah, everybody has a talent. Well, I have a talent. Well, yeah, but you're not. You're 4. We don't know what it is yet, but we'll learn. Well, what's your talent, Dad? Well, I kind of like to teach people how to do things. He says, "Do you do it?" And I said, "Hang on." And I picked up the cell phone and I called Chris Cook and got his voicemail. I said, "Chris, I'm going to be on your next Knowledge Fest schedule. We'll talk about what the topic is later. Thanks, bye." And I turned and looked at my son and said, "Yes." Because I was not willing to be full of crap in that moment. Maybe the rest of my life, but that moment I wasn't going to be full of crap. And that's where that came from.
That's a good story.
What's the pre music car life of Ken Ward look like? I know there was some time with down in Southern California, and that's about as much as I know, but
I was doing pinstripes and door edge guards and wheel lip moldings and pop-up sunroofs at the Escondido Auto Mall. And my boss pointed at a 300ZX that somebody was tinting the rear hatch in 1986, and he said, "We're going to send you to tint school so you can do that." And I looked at that guy and I said, "God, I don't ever want to be in that physical position. That looks like murder." And I went and applied for a job at a 7-store car stereo chain. And they hired me for the tent sale, and I thought that was good. The tent sale every summer, they would hire new meat, throw them in the tent, throw all the bottom salespeople in the tent, put in 1 or 2 stars to sell all the product, and then fire everybody in the bottom half of the sales report. And I survived that. And I was at Mad Jack's for 3 years, and then I got promoted to customer there. Screwed up. And I went and got a job at a little independent called Ultimate Auto Sound. And that's been gone for years. But we worked at Ultimate Auto Sound for 3 years and got its numbers quite a bit up. And really, we actually did the trivia question. We did the Yamaha demo car for CES for the YDSP-1, which was just a horrible DSP processor. Recreated everything you ever hated about a live music venue that you've ever visited. I worked there up until the first Gulf War, and I'm in North County, San Diego, and Camp Pendleton cleans out, and all the retail in San Diego is just in the toilet because all the Navy guys are gone and all the Marines are gone, and my store has got no sales. So an alarm company in northern San Diego County had a listing for a tech support job. And boy, did I put one over on them, because I'd never installed an alarm for money in my life. For 2 years, I kept a relay on my desk so I could look at the numbers on the side of the relay when I told somebody how to wire it. And I actually would get people that didn't know what I meant because they'd never seen the numbers. They only memorized the position of the tab on it. And so it was like we were speaking different languages. But I ran the tech support department there for 5 years. And
what years is that? I don't think how many times we talked on the phone.
It was late 90 or 91 until 95. But the last year I was working on directed audio. And directed audio was a initiative. I actually left before we shipped. A number of suppliers told Daryl Issa, the owner of Directed, that if he had an audio line, they would try it because they were unhappy with the delivery and the logistics from their existing audio lines. So he told me to put together an audio line, and we had 2. We had a high-end, made in the USA line planned, and we had a lower-cost offshore line planned. And right at the end, Daryl pulled what I will say is kind of like a classic Daryl Issa. He canceled the made in the U.S. stuff and told me to reposition the stuff that was being made offshore as the high-end stuff. And at the time, that was one of the reasons I quit. But looking back at it, he may have been prescient. I may have been seeing the future. I think I may have missed the boat on that one. But that was, then I moved to Oregon. So my retail for many years was in SoCal, down there where you are, Gary.
I feel like it's kind of backwards, because I feel like generally when people get into tech support, maybe this is just in the current day of our industry, you've been there, done that, you've installed everything, and you just want to get the hell out of the bay, sit in an office and use your knowledge. But it seems like you did that preemptively, maybe because you maybe always subliminally had this knack for teaching or helping, which now it's full circle.
I remember in 1993, I was going to Denver to train the 7 stores of Quality Auto Sound, a dealer that I really miss, because Hugh, the owner of Quality Auto Sound, really had some high standards. He was one of the people that was the initial driver behind MECP. And I called my mom and I told her, Mom, I'm going to Denver for training. And she said, oh, it's great. They're finally going to get you some training. And I went, no, Mom. I'm the man. Like, I'm doing the training. But I think that helped, because I do know, and I don't mean any criticism. I guess there's a little criticism here. But a lot of guys who have been installing and their knees are shot and their back is shot and they don't want to be in the bay anymore, and they're in tech support, and they're in tech support till they retire.
Yep.
And I wasn't. I knew I could go back to the retail world anytime I wanted, and I eventually did. And that gave me freedom to argue with Daryl whenever I thought it was appropriate, which he respected and actually kept me around because I would stand up to him. Mm-hmm. And obviously he would have benefited from keeping people like that around now, because I think he is just a rich guy who says stupid things and no one says, Psst, hey, that's kind of dumb.
I hope he's not a podcast listener.
Right. I'm pretty sure it's on his hit list.
Oh, but hey, Daryl, if you're on here, you know it's true, baby. So I moved to Oregon and I went to work for a local chain. Then I went to work for a local single store. Tried repping for a little bit, and that was not my cup of tea. I had been a rep for 3 months at Directed, and I knew the line inside and out, and I set records. I set records for the territory for a quarter and a month. And then I was a rep, an independent rep with a few different lines in my bag, and I discovered that it doesn't matter whether the product is any good or not, you got to sell what you got. And as a retailer, and you guys are both in retail, and you know that your stores in the past may have had products that you really believed in and products that you weren't as confident in, and you got to pick what you were going to emphasize. And our independent reps don't always have that luxury. Sometimes they have, some years suck, I think, to be an independent rep, and that was certainly not my cup of tea. So I did my cup of coffee, and I went back to retail.
I think that we're lucky, Matt, that we get to kind of cherry pick lines too, and use the upper shelf stuff. And there are a lot of guys that are responsible for selling a lot of cheap coaxes.
Yeah, I think the way that I kind of emphasize it to each client is every company that we know of, they spend a lot of their R&D into one specific area, I feel, right? So there's a lot of companies, and you can go down the different lines, and you think of certain products that they're really good at making, right? And that's kind of how I've always sold. I sell a lot of different brands, but when I go to that brand, I sell something very specific that they're really good at making. It's kind of how I've always done it throughout my career.
And often in that vein, I feel it's often what that company's claim to fame is.
Right.
Company A may have started out with speakers, and speakers is their strength, and then they brought out some amps because they felt like they wanted to try to be a one-stop shop.
Of course. Yeah.
And they don't have any special technology in the amps. They're just amps.
Right.
Or vice versa.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I felt like that for a long time, and, don't want to say any specific products that give me an analogy to do that, because I don't want to throw any brands under the bus in a certain aspect. But, I feel like just there's a lot of brands, I think, when they see their vision and they see their next 5 years. They spend time and money and they project it to one area of car audio. I feel like none of them just disperse the money evenly throughout everything that they make. They want to make something that's really good, that's a flagship model, that is going to be the best of the best.
I've been working for Electromedia for less than a year full time. I've done some contract work for them and training before that, and I've done also contract work for other suppliers in our industry for training also. And it's been interesting to, Electromedia was founded by 3 people in Italy who ran the company up until Mr. Vagnoni passed away a few months ago, unfortunately. And Mr. Vagnoni was always the audio guy who was the audiophile. And his partner, Mr. Pantaleone, was the business guy. So you can imagine that they probably weren't always on the same page of every project. And so now that Mr. Vagnoni is gone, Mr. Pantaleone is taking over a lot of those projects. And I just had a presentation to do to him at 5:30 in the morning Pacific time, explaining some of the audio things that I was proposing. And I think that must have been a really great partnership to have, and kind of like the partnership that Tom and I had, because I was the tuning guy and the sales guy, and Tom was the fabrication and the physical installation guy. And we were very complementary. And, especially back when we were like, I know that you guys are doing it all, right? You guys are handling it from soup to nuts. And I think it gave each of us a little bit more room to relax. Because sometimes I would imagine that's a lot to carry. Also,
staying on that topic, we had asked Tom, where did the name Musicar come from, and how many other names were in consideration? He said, I don't know. Ken had that name. Ken liked it, and I was like, all right, that's good. So I'm going to ask you, what other names were in consideration? Was that the only one? And what made you land with Musicar? Because it is a very in the world of advertising, simplicity is everything. And that is music and car, and it's combined into one word. Maybe I'm already answering the question.
There used to be a shop in Chicago called Musicar that I dimly remembered from the 80s, but they've been closed for a long time. I had a shop about 2006 timeframe called Avancar, back when we thought video was really going to be a category that was staying, and it was AV in car. And we ended up closing that shop. And also, by the way, I thought it was a great name. A lot of people love how it sounds. No one can spell it. Avancar just did not work from a spelling point of view. And I decided the whole video thing was just not for me, and that music was really where it was at. Now, it turned out that Tom and I regularly joked that we should have called the business Radar Car. Because that was as equally an important category for us. But he's right. I had already registered the name. I had already done the LLC filing, and I had already registered the name everywhere before we talked about it. And so I was like, we can change it if we need to, but this is what I've got. And he warmed to it. I will say that. So I didn't mean to give him the rush on it, but it was sort of inadvertent.
Who designed the first version of the logo?
Our friend Andy Day, who runs a tint shop in town, actually created that on the plotter, using the software for the plotter when he decided to. And at first he had to export it from the plotter software as an EPS file for us to get it. Is that first logo, which I think Tom just replaced with a nice modern version like a year ago, which is on your hat.
Yeah.
Ta-da.
Yep.
That's one of the things that I had not had prior to working with Tom, and I think you guys can appreciate how rare this is. When it comes down to anything that had to do with design, whether it was the color of the business cards, the color of the flooring in the second location that we had them install, anything that had to do with design, I was totally trusting that Tom was going to make a better decision than I could. I actually told one of our clients once when we were doing a subwoofer enclosure for a Ferrari, and the customer said, well, what's it going to look like? And I said, I'm not exactly sure, but it's going to be better than anything I could come up with to try to convince you that it's going to be great. And that was not compelling for him, so he ended up having Tom sketch him what it would look like, and then he said, okay, we'll do that. and that turned out to be a customer that is literally Musicar's best customer to date. I think we've done radar for them for him in about 17 cars. And
wow.
He owns a charity called Dream Drives for Kids, where he takes the supercars, which are owned by the charity, to Dornbecker Children's Hospital and lets sick kids ride in Ferraris, Lamborghinis, McLarens.
That's awesome.
It is a win-win deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's pretty freaking cool.
So at your time in Musicar, talking about the sales side of things, because you handled at the time majority of sales, I'm assuming.
Tom had a Rolodex of some customers that every 2-3 years they'd get a new car and they'd get a full radar system. And they were comfortable with him, but a lot of them were comfortable with me when Tom said he's okay, and gave me the holy water. But yes, I took care of a lot of the new customers also.
So this podcast really is, I feel like it's become a melting pot of an audience, but I think Gary and I really wanted to start this because of the questions that we get asked all the time by enthusiasts, and enthusiasts are always looking for content. Like people in today's car audio world, when they're shopping, they're educated, and we've said this in the past that a lot of the clientele are 40 to 70-ish, and they were coming up in the golden age of car audio and in the 90s, and they had things in their car and they want to relive that. And now they have the means to do so. They have a car that they don't trust just a random person working on, and they seek out different avenues of research when they're ready to spend money, because nobody wants to spend an absurd amount of money and not feel like they're educated.
Crazy.
Right.
Yeah, no one ever wants to go crazy. I always lament that. Can someone just want to go crazy just once?
Like one of my last clients, maybe he's listening to the podcast, but I realized after I did the demo that he's on like Strictly Sound Quality. I had no idea, which is a Facebook group for, I would say, a lot of enthusiasts and insiders on Facebook. But I had no idea, and I had no idea about a lot of his other endeavors with car audio until after I did the demo. And I feel like more and more this podcast has been made to answer questions, so they're already prepped in the sales process. And basically, when you were there talking to these clients, what was, I mean, it's kind of a loaded question, but what was your way of breaking the ice and educating? How are you selling high-end systems if somebody's coming in and has an expectation for, a $3,000 audio system? How are you educating them?
Over the years, I've taken some classes and learned some things about myself and other people and how different people reach decisions differently. And I've built that into how I deal with my clients. A good number of my clients, and I think this is true for all of us, if they're having us work on a Porsche, if they're having us work on a high-end premium vehicle, they do not want to spend a tremendous amount of time doing the job themselves. They don't want to manage the project themselves. They want to find someone that they trust, and they will ask questions and ask you to demonstrate your competence, and until they decide that they bless you, they accept you.
Mm-hmm. I 100% agree.
And then they're done. They know you're the person, and they're moving on. So with those customers, I want to openly show them the possibilities without preaching at them, without being didactic. Because those folks want to drive the bus. They're very comfortable driving the bus. And I need to let go of any, yeah, sure, I owned the place with Tom, I didn't need to prove it all the time. I needed to say, with that vehicle, we've had success here. Let me know what you think of this approach. Rather than telling them how they need to do it, because all that would do was rub them the wrong way, because they weren't looking to be told what to do. They were looking for an expert that they trusted. Now, we also saw a good number of people who approached decisions very analytically. As you know, we specialized a lot in BMWs, and we brought Porsches in as an area of specialty later on. And a lot of the people that came in with BMWs were engineers and accountants and had a very analytical approach to their decision. And what I learned was the online content that we posted regularly gave them a lot of their data. But what worked really well was giving them a lot of data. And I liken it to online dating. When I was single and I was online dating, I learned that I want to get directly to coffee. I do not want to exchange a bunch of emails, because beyond a certain point, we will have an idea of the person that's wrong. So I will send one big email. I send one big email to my client, and I take them through A to B or A to Z. And then we have a basis to talk about. And with the customers that are very analytical, that was a big hit for them. They let me know over and over, I really appreciate all the information. And that information, we didn't whittle it out of unobtainium for every email. We, as much as possible, we kept the explanations that we were told were clear and used them over again. I don't know if I really answered your question very well on that one.
No, I think that was actually a pretty good answer.
The biggest thing that I remember is that I don't educate people so that they can tune the car, because that's not what they want. They want to be comfortable that I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
and
100%. That is, so for the people listening, and I 100% agree with what you're saying, when somebody walks in the store, and in 2021, I feel like I would say, most clients who are serious with purchasing anything over a certain amount of money, they're going to come in with some level of education, right? Whether they've done something online, they've watched YouTube videos, they're going to know something about something. And the second that you don't have a rebuttal for anything that they say, you've lost, right? Because you haven't gained their trust. So you need to understand from a sales side, okay, if somebody says this, I have an answer for it. If you're talking about, well, I can get the product cheaper online. I mean, a rebuttal for that, a rebuttal for literally anything that you can think of. You have to be well prepared. You got to have the answer for everything that they're going to say, because that's going to gain trust. And I've made this analogy on the podcast that if I'm getting, work done on my house and I'm getting drywall done, if I start saying to the person doing the drywall certain things about it, and he's like, no, that's against code, no, we wouldn't do that because of this, then I'm instantly going to respect that person's knowledge, because, okay, that guy obviously knows more than me. I'm just going to shut up and let him talk.
And I think all of us have been around a salesperson who could say whatever they wanted to say and would have a high degree of believability for a while. And I think technically those people are called sociopaths. I am at the other end of that, where growing up, every time I lied to my mom, I got caught. I actually grew up thinking my mom had some superpower where she could tell every time I lied. And so I actually developed this, okay, I'm not going to lie, because it never works. Not because I had this high ethical position. It was just, it never worked. And so I took that into sales. And when in sales, I was like, okay, I think I can do this and be legit, because if I make up stories, I'm a crappy liar. They're going to know. And I believe that some degree of that comes through.
I'm interested. At some point, I feel like we should craft some questions to give to our consumer listeners that they can ask in a shop and the answers they should be getting to weed out those salesmen that will just feed them whatever they think they want to hear type of scenario. I feel bad when I see some of the system designs and the stuff that gets sold to customers that's just like, there's no way this combination of things is ever going to give you any sort of great listening experience.
You know, you need a license to cut hair in most jurisdictions. And I cut my own hair a lot of time, as you can tell, because I'm on video. But you need a license to do it professionally, and it is disappointing at the wide variety of solutions that you might be presented. I know that when I was at Musicar, and it goes on to this day, that they would see once a month, they would see a $7,000 to $10,000 job come in from elsewhere that was done by a blind guy with a lightsaber, and they would just wish they'd had a shot at it, because and we see that. I have friends who are technicians who deliver excellent work, and it seems like a lot of shops do their best work when the technician and the salesperson work closely together, and the technician can sort of filter out the bad ideas and make sure that the only ideas that are implemented are reasonable and defensible. The shops that are sales driven, where the installer's job is just to do whatever is on the ticket with no conversation, no communication, that can't be consistently delivering good results. There's too many things that we find out later in the process.
There's also a wide variance in how shops operate. You know, there's a good number of smaller shops where there's an owner that kind of sits up front and deals with customers and answers the phone. And then there's other shops that have very educated salespeople that either are, you know, previous installers or super enthusiasts and work in the industry. And then there's other shops where there's just somebody that's an order taker, you know, oh, you want a 12-inch woofer? I have a 12-inch woofer. Here you go.
And considering that you're in Los Angeles, a metro area, you're in Orange County, technically, right? So you probably have all of those within a mortar shot of where you are. It's a wide variety in Southern California, as I recall.
Oh yeah, there's so many shops, and it's so all over the board on, you know, between the Stack 'em High, Watch 'em Fly guys, and, you know, just between me, I always joke that it's literally a half-mile radius is myself, Speakerworks, and Royce are all like, we're on 3 streets that connect. Like we could almost hit baseballs from one another.
Speaking of Speakerworks, that was actually one of the highlights of my career, was the very first Long Beach Knowledge Fest a few years ago. And I did my class on OE integration, and I think there was a new twist to the OE integration where it was the first time I talked about all-pass filters and phase. And some guy wearing a flannel shirt and a baseball cap came up to me and said afterward and said, "Hey, I just wanted to tell you I've been doing this forever, and I really enjoyed hearing that. It really, really explained some things that had bothered me for a while, and I want to thank you for having done it." I look at the guy's badge, and it's Patrick Holdaway.
Yep.
And I'm like, that's the high point of my career, because the last time I talked to one of you guys, it was Eric calling to try to get Viper to pay for a ticket for somebody driving around with their parking lights on and no headlights, because that's a citable offense in California, because they installed the Viper alarm off book. And I had to tell Eric no. So this was a big step up from the last conversation.
Yeah, that's awesome. And going back to like the whole sales process, I feel like, so there's a lot of shops out there that are yes men, right? The customer comes in, they say, I want this, but the sales guy is not taking the opportunity to educate and let them know why that might be wrong, and using that as the ability to gain the rapport and the trust to move forward to something bigger and better. And like, just an analogy from like a home side would be like, if I'm getting a deck built, right, and I'm using treated lumber, And then I'm the homeowner and I'm like, I want it stained too, right? Well, you have to let that wood weather for a bit before you stain it. So if I were to stain it, building a deck, I'm doing you a disservice because it's not how it's supposed to be. But if I talk to you and say, hey, I'm not going to take your money right now because it's not what we should do, and we're going to wait 6 months or 8 months and then stain your deck, that's building trust. And at that moment, that person knows that, okay, I can trust you no matter what, my car, whatever. I'm all ears. You let me know and we can have an educated conversation, and people then are willing to trust you with, whatever it is that you're going to do to their car.
Obviously, I can't disagree with any of what you just said. There's a book by Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers. And
one of the greatest books ever. Love that book.
And one of the things that he explains in there is that Bill Gates became a computer expert because he lived within walking distance of the University of Washington supercomputer. Now, Bill Gates is a brilliant guy, and he had all sorts of other things going for him. But if you pick him up and you drop him in the outskirts of Kansas, is he going to become Bill Gates?
Nope.
So from a sales point of view, there were two parts of my childhood that affected how I came at sales. Part of it was that my father was in the pesticide application business in El Centro, California, where it reaches 120 degrees in the summertime. It's a miserable place to be outside in the summer. And he was an asthmatic who applied pesticides to crops for a living. Probably not a great fit. And he didn't make a lot of money doing it, and he did it because he didn't feel that he had options doing other things. He had a tough job for a long time, and I always told myself growing up that I would never put myself in a position where I had to be in a job I hated to make a living, and I wouldn't try other things. And then I was raised in a religious denomination that I'm not in anymore, who would knock on people's doors and tell them that they needed to change their religion or things were going to go badly in the future. And as you can imagine, that was not a message that was met with a lot of warmth during the game of the week when people are trying to watch Scully and Garagiola call a baseball game. And so people ask me, how did you deal with the rejection in sales? And I said, hey, you try knocking on somebody's door and telling them they have to change their religion when they're trying to watch a baseball game. This is easy. You have no idea. And so I wasn't afraid of someone telling me, no, I don't want to buy that expensive but high performance system. I just want this bad idea that I came in with. I wasn't afraid to engage with those folks. And if they said, no, you're wrong, I want these 3-way 6x9s, it wasn't going to mean anything about me. I'd already had this out in other venues. I think a lot of folks who are in sales are terrified that the customer is going to walk. And they let that concern, that fear, drive them to saying yes to bad ideas.
100%.
And I was fortunate that I was inoculated against that at an early age.
That's why I proposed a question to you, because I feel like the biggest downfall of our industry is sales, right? And it's the education. They go hand in hand. And that's why it's important to have you talk about these certain avenues when a customer comes in, who in most cases today are already somewhat pre-qualified to where they have a little bit of knowledge to talk. And if the sales guy doesn't know something that guy's educated himself with, you're automatically, I don't trust you, right? And then they might move on. And we can say the same thing when we go to different, if we're buying a car or if we're doing something and we're like, this guy's full of shit. Like, let's go somewhere else, right? Because that's how it is. It doesn't matter who's installing in the bay. If that person doesn't know who's installing in the bay and their vision of your shop is this sales guy, like, you could lose something huge just because of that.
I have a friend who used to be in our field, and he's in a completely different field now. And he wanted me to do a training seminar for sales engineers, because you guys know some engineers, and you know that they're not necessarily the best salespeople because they're nuts and bolts and mechanism, and they're not relationship oriented in many cases. And we, I think, in our industry tend to get people who are relationship oriented, especially in the account sales, like the sales reps. We get a lot of people who are relationship oriented and want to maintain a relationship. And when it comes to the mechanism of how something works, that is not their bag baby. And maybe you could do that in the deck and 4 era, where Hondas were coming with a blank plate where the radio should go and there was no antenna in the roof, and you were selling a deck, 4 harness, and an antenna every day, and you had 6 of them lined up. And those days are gone for our industry. Those days are gone for consumers. You can buy a car is going to come with a standard audio system that is better than what we were selling years ago, but it's not excellent. And there are a lot of moving parts for the attitude, or attitude's not the right word. People who are really comfortable with a relationship and haven't challenged themselves to get good at mechanism, they can't handle complex audio questions. And it is a rare person that can do both. One of the reasons that I felt comfortable selling Musicar to Tom when I did is that we had hired Nick Aiken. And Nick Aiken is one of the best salespeople I've ever worked with. And he gives away nothing on the system design side. So both Tom and I were like, wow, this is a real opportunity. And I have to say that Nick had been at a couple of operations before he came to ours, and he really blossomed at Musicar in the environment that we had, and we really appreciate that he brought what he did. But gosh, that sort of find is just so rare that it's very difficult to build a business plan around, right? Because as you mentioned, Matt,
it's not scalable.
Well, I mean, he's people like that though are treating it as a career and a passion intertwined in one, whereas a lot of salespeople are treating it as a job, right? So they're not taking the information and seeking it out off the clock. That's the big part. Is are you trying to progress off the clock, right?
And my dad was 26 and had 2 kids, and his wife didn't work. So he, if my dad had been a stereo salesperson at 26, would he have just done the 3-way 6x9s? I'll never know. If I was in that situation, I'll never know. I've been really fortunate that I've never felt desperate. I've never felt financially in such straits that if I didn't sell what we had, that I was eating top ramen. I mean, sometimes I ate top ramen anyway, but some people, I think, have to make that decision based on taking care of their family, and I don't begrudge anyone in that spot. I feel fortunate that I've been able to branch out.
And getting back to talking about that sales process, when 20 years ago, when DSP wasn't really active in cars, right? And you're literally swapping speakers, adding power in the same locations. There's not a lot that goes wrong because you're adding power, you're adding better speakers, you're going to get a better product. Now, in the world that we're in, everything has a DSP for the most part. Everything is tuned, and we have to then replace the equipment, completely change the EQ, retune everything, and get better imaging than the factory is going to give you, right? Which creates cataclysmic amount of issues for a lot of shops that aren't educated to tackle that, right? And you and I were talking on the phone the other day. We're talking about the Tesla Plaid. You had some questions. And I said, Ken, we're doing a podcast right now. Let's just stop talking and we'll get you on the podcast, right? Because that Plaid is the future of where this audio is going to go and how much work it's going to be to integrate into most cars when they become all electric. and they all have their own operating electrical system. It's making it harder for the sales guy to understand how to sell anything for the car. It's harder for the installer to execute something better than the car is delivering. And if you don't do any of those, guess what? You're out of business. Okay? So this is the biggest issue that I foresee in our industry. And I kind of hinted these questions at Manville and Andy when we had them on the podcast about, like, where do you see the biggest issues with car audio a couple years from now? And I feel like I didn't get the answer that I was trying to get. And then when we were talking on the phone, I feel like we were starting this podcast about this exact issue. And you came from a sales background, and I feel like you're the perfect guest to kind of intertwine this mess of issues.
Now I'm really wishing I remembered exactly what smart thing I said when we were on the phone. But I have a class right now that I've been teaching. Gosh, we're trying to remember with COVID. I guess I started it 2 years ago. When I started teaching OEM integration, it was essentially based on, you're the technician, you got a stack of gear, you hopefully got some kind of plan that the gear was supposed to follow, and you have to make sure the gear isn't going to blow up and that it's going to get the sound that it needs from the factory system. But it was very much assuming that you could work with what was there. And it became apparent a few years in that model didn't always work. And very quickly, I think it became a minority of times that model could actually work. You still needed to make sure, you still needed to do these tests, but they were not enough. I started a model that, and Andy Waymeyer had a lot of input on this. I call it the 6 stereo presentations. And the first one is stereo, and that's what we always assumed was there. And we can work with stereo. Most of our industry practices assume we're getting stereo. The 5 other ones are ways the factory screws up stereo or changes stereo. I'd be a little pejorative. Ways that they have changed stereo for their own evil purposes. And if we don't notice that they did, the techniques we were planning on using will not give us the results we expect.
Exactly.
And it'll waste a bunch of our time.
Exactly.
And in many cases, shops may give up and say, we don't know what to do. We're just going to ship it and see if they come back.
Right.
And that is a big lift, because you're saying to salespeople, you have to change your process. You have to go to the car and do this test just to find out what road you're going to take. And that's a tough sell to take somebody who has had a process for 5 years or 10 years or 15 years and say, okay, now you're going to do it this way because of this esoteric concept that you don't really understand, but you're supposed to believe me, this old guy. It's a big lift. I'm very, and this is not pandering. The first thing that Electromedia had me do last year was participate with one of their worldwide managers, sales managers, in a OEM integration series of webinars. We did 6 webinars, and they said, what do you want to tell dealers to do? And it wasn't quite carte blanche, because they didn't like all of my jokes, but they let me talk technically about the problems I was seeing and the solutions without any constraints. And I thought that was very encouraging. And it's one of the reasons I was open to taking the position that I have with them now, was they wanted to know what was happening in the cars.
And just for the enthusiasts listening, just name I would say the brands under Electromedia.
So Electromedia started off with Audison, which is an amplifier brand that was always an audiophile inclined amplifier. In later years, they created the Hertz brand to initially bring speakers that were designed for cars. The lore, the internal lore, is that they saw a lot of home audio companies selling home audio drivers for car. And I think we see a little bit of that still today. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to address certain problems that they didn't see being addressed. So in that intervening time, because I think the Hertz brand is over 20 years old now, both lines have speakers and amps. Both lines have DSPs. They've become complementary lines. They also own a speaker factory in China. Most companies, when they say they own a speaker factory in China, they're lying, because they maybe own 49% of a speaker factory in China. Through some sort of weird deal, they actually ended up accidentally owning the whole thing. But they, in order to keep that factory busy, they only make their own car audio there. But they make a line of pro audio drivers called La Voce, which compete with other pro audio companies that are older, but have done a good job of winning some nice contracts and are available in a lot of the pro audio driver distributors that we all know when we want to buy a raw driver. So they don't just build car audio drivers; they also build pro audio gear and drivers that are used by some home audio assembly houses who design their own home speakers.
Well said. And just to kind of go back to what you were saying about our initial conversation with manufacturers screwing up the audio signal and making it more work for us to give you better sound. I mean, just going back to the Tesla Plaid, it's a perfect example. In this new version, it's not an upmix system. They do have a center channel, but in the center channel, they put certain chimes in there, right? So Bluetooth will come through all the speakers, or the front side speakers, the mid-range and the tweeter, but certain autopilot signals, or if the charger is in the port and you go to drive away, it gives you like a couple quick chimes that only comes to the center, right? So integrating into that audio system, we have to mix in that center into everything else, which further screws up the signal, especially if it's not an upmix system. So that is where understanding how the system works, giving the consumer another solution, right? Like a Bluetooth input, because most of the time when they're listening to audio, they're going to be using their phone, and you can Bluetooth connect to, a certain signal into the DSP and also the car at the same time. And then you're then selling the fact that they're still using the MCU or the Tesla or any factory radio. You could even be in CarPlay and connected to a Bluetooth interface and the CarPlay at the same time, plugged in, or Bluetooth going to the radio at the same time. And you're sending the signal directly to the processor. You're still using the interface, so it looks like you're using the radio, but you're actually sending a perfect digital signal to the processor that you don't have to worry about any fucking bullshit with the factory stereo.
Well, you guys aren't afraid to get technical,
right?
That is an area that the going around the OEM system. There's times where that is the path to fidelity. Right. And we all remember when that happened to us with exotic cars, like a Tesla or some other vehicle where there were some Range Rovers where like the Logic 7 HD system. I was
thinking Mercedes in the 90s when the fiber optic came out, and we were like, what do we do?
Yeah, and for the enthusiast, because obviously they're not as technical as we are, we're talking about cars in which they don't make a factory amplifier interface preamp for our audio system, right? We have MoBridge, we have Nav TV, we have PAC. These are interfaces in which, in most cases, the factory amp comes out, this interface gets plugged in, and you're basically, essentially, making the factory radio an aftermarket radio for the most part.
And a few years ago, it looked like that category of product was going to be our savior in the industry. Mm-hmm. And then a bunch of auto manufacturers went to new network technologies. And we found out that there is a big lag time between that technology coming to market in a car and us getting a third-party solution that's reverse engineered off of that. So I think right now we've got BMW, Range Rover, Mercedes with, I think somebody just came out with Mercedes coax, but there's half a dozen different technologies out there.
Of course, all different protocols. Yeah.
Yeah. And in some cases, no one ever will, because the number of those vehicles, if it's a small, like BMW is a big maker. I'm sure somebody's going to address BMW eventually, but smaller companies, there may not be an ROI, because to pay for the development, you might have to charge $2,000, $2,500 per adapter. And you and I could design a system for certain customers who would happily buy that piece, but that is not something that most of the market would support. And the volumes would just be tough to make pencil out.
Right. And just you hitting on that issue, right, about all the different things that we can address quickly, the next thing up in what I'm seeing is going to be varying voltages on every single car. You're gonna, I'm predicting Ford's going to have their own voltage that they're going to run at. You're going to have all these different manufacturers having these very specific voltages. And maybe part of that is to vary, you know, what aftermarket can do, or to make a very specific thing where nobody's touching anything. I don't know. But I think we're going to start seeing 18 volt, 24 volt, 48 volt systems in the future.
That is an interesting and scary thought. I have created a different scenario in my head, and we'll see how things work out. There are ISO standards for 48 volts, and 48 volts is high enough to where you can cut the current draw by 75% and still not exceed the 60 volt unsafe voltage standard that exists, where anything below 60 volts is considered low voltage in a car. So Vallejo and Continental and Hella are three OEMs who have built a lot of parts for 48 volt systems. What I haven't seen any of them build is windshield wiper motors and door lock actuators and seat motors that work on anything but 12 volts. That doesn't mean they won't, but I think there's an ecosystem of all of those old technology electric devices, and I think that those can't splinter in too many different directions. I think they're going to be 12 or 48. And if those tier one suppliers can get people to coalesce around 48, and Elon Musk sells cars, but he also does create attention, and he created a lot of attention when the Plaid came out, saying we should have gone to 48 volt already. And a lot of tier ones were like, yeah, because we've been working on that. Vallejo built an entire electric car that had a 48 volt motor, a 48 volt battery pack, and a 48 volt DC to DC converter that was their design. And they said, look, it's an entirely 48 volt car. It wasn't. It still had the 12 volt wiper motors, and it still had the 12 volt, everything else. So I think regulated amplifiers, which we remember were bigger in years past than they have been for quite a while, may play a role for a few years. But I am really hoping that 48 volts is where it's at. I hope that we get there.
We would be so much happier with 48 volt car amplifiers. Would make things, it would really step up the compact DSP amp game. Like it would be a game changer. But in that scenario, Ken, the 48 to 12 volt down convert is super simple, super easy in comparison of going the other direction.
Yes. If we could
golf
have,
cart days.
I think a DC to DC converter, third party DC to DC converter that takes 48 volts in and gives us 12 volts out for our legacy equipment might be a stepping stone.
Right.
But, in low power amplifier situations, it's not like you're going to put 4,000 watts in a car with a DC to DC 48 to 12 volt converter. I mean, maybe.
I'm not a double E, but I like to draw blocks on the dry erase board. Yeah,
I mean it's going to get interesting for sure, and when we got this Plaid and we're like, okay, the battery's gone. Like the traditional automotive battery is gone. It's a little BCM battery pack that's really what appears to only power the equipment in the car. And it's 15.5 volts. It throws a fucking wrench into your plan. There's points in which you have to use your knowledge and expertise and things you've done in the past, and you have to put something where you think it's going to work, and you got to cross your fingers because you're the first person trying this out. You know?
Yep. And I've not had that exact experience that you had with the Plaid. I remember that we had a customer who asked us to put a system into 5 Series, an F10 5 Series, that was stupid big, the system. It used 4 old school Class AB amplifiers from the 90s that each one of them was huge. And we installed a second battery, and we made sure he had the maximum alternator in the BMW line. And we Tom fabricated this great little display because one of the amps had a voltage indication in the controller, and he built the controller into a display in this where the center channel used to be.
Of course.
And I remember we started the car, and I'm watching the voltage, and I'm playing the system, and the voltage is going down and down and down. And it's not going down fast, but it's not going up, and the car's running. Mm-hmm. And I'm waiting for that alternator to kick in, and it's not kicking in. And I end up printing out, I went to the BMW TIS website and paid for a day's worth of access and downloaded all the information on the smart alternator systems that they had adopted in the 7 a couple of years before. And I spent almost a whole day reading this information. And when I was done reading it, I went out to the car and I moved our ground 6 inches and fixed the problem.
Gosh.
Because it turned out the technician who had worked on the car grounded on the wrong side of the ground strap that had the current sensor in it. And until that current sensor saw our electrons passing through it, mm-hmm. that alternator was never going to respond to our current draw. And moving our ground, not only 6 inches, but where it should have been in the first place, it solved the problem. And it's kind of like that old story about how you don't charge for making the chalk mark on the floor, you charge for knowing where to put the chalk mark. That took an awful lot of time, not just the 3/4 of a day reading all the paperwork, but being in a position where it made any sense. I could have read that stuff when I was 20 and I wouldn't have known what any of it meant. That sort of thing we encounter more regularly than ever before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And there's a lot of systems now. There's a lot of alternator systems that are, reduced load and changing voltages and not charging. We're old school. Matt's kind of mid school, I'd say, in that we still go to a car and we expect to see 14.4 if we're above 2,000 RPMs. And when you have something that's like, oh, it's at 13.6, my little Dodge van that I had, it would charge at 13.6.
The new cars, just the ICE cars, the internal combustion cars, they're absolutely backwards. They charge when they coast. They charge at a stop. And when you accelerate, they take the load off the alternator to improve the fuel economy. And it is exactly the mirror image of what I expected as an old school guy to see from an alternator.
How easy is home audio? Let's just get that out of the way.
Well, no, you gotta buy all those little stands to get your wires off the floor, and there's a lot of stuff there.
I think the guy that ends up doing the home audio ends up doing the lighting and the climate, the multi-zone climate control, and I think it has its own set of challenges, most of which seem to be taken care of in an upright position. The classic picture of Matt, for MECP, we're often not in that nice, sitting at the desk position when we're making our magic happen.
It's funny when we were doing that photo shoot, he was taking a lot of the pictures, and he kept asking me to pose, and I said, I'm not going to do that because you're going to you're making it out like it's going to be something that would make zero sense. I'm not doing that. Like, he wanted me like under the car with a multimeter, and I'm like, no, that's not a real scenario. I'm not
like
doing
the
that.
picture of the girl soldering where she's grabbing the soldering iron by the hot part, or it's one of those.
I was bitter too, because one of the pictures that made it into the print was, I was like testing like a cigarette lighter with the multimeter, but he had taken the picture before I stuck the second probe in. So it looks like I'm doing nothing.
It's a Bluetooth.
It looks like I'm a big dumb. Yeah.
Oh man. I was gonna say, fun. Matt, you were talking about the plaid and the voltage, and you were saying it was 15.5 volts, and you're having trouble finding a way to tap into that system. I think I had made mention that I got wind of some future OEM projects where there's a car that's slated to come out. I want to say we're 2 years away now. And the guys that had seen the prototype of it were basically like, there is no battery connection, right? Like, it's literally harnesses. Everything plugs in. There is no tap. There's no jump point. There's
right. And that's very close to what the Tesla was. The only point was a spot in which I would say a technician would test to see if that system is physically working.
Yeah, that is kind of scary.
It wasn't a tap in. It's not like you can undo a bolt and tap your wire in. I had to physically tap a piece of metal in order to make that connection.
Right. If you guys are listening, AMP and Metra, all those guys, like, you have to have a machine shop that machines adapter parts for us to tap power in. Get on it now. We don't want to wait.
I remember seeing how you connected for power there, and seeing the picture and thinking, I immediately knew the lengths that you went to avoid that, and how you would have liked to have found another path. And I thought, what a limiting factor that's got to be. And obviously there's wire in the car, but it's like you said, it's all plug in. What I was going to say before was, there is a U.S. federal law called the Magnuson-Moss Act, which I think, I am not a lawyer, but I think it gets misinterpreted by some dealers. My understanding of the Magnuson-Moss Act was
that's a warranty act.
You couldn't void a warranty for buying something on the aftermarket that you could have bought from the dealer. The dealer wasn't allowed to say, ours won't void the warranty, but theirs will. So there are some audio upgrades that BMW sold in Europe that they would not sell in the U.S. that were parts department plug-and-play upgrades. They weren't very good, but they wouldn't sell them in the U.S. because if they did, they opened up the ability to allow people to do their own audio upgrades with impunity. I don't think the Magnuson-Moss Act protects the aftermarket. I don't think that we're protected to be able to modify a car. I think the best friend we have in modifying cars are the legacy car makers like Ford and what we used to call the Big Three, who have been active in SEMA and whose vehicles have been modified in a sanctioned way for decades. And they have those measurement get-togethers where people get to measure the new vehicles before they ship and get to design all the aftermarket parts to fit them. I think those people, those are the ones that have been supporting the Right to Repair Act, and those are the people who have been supporting the aftermarket. When we get into the new car makers who, like Tesla, think of themselves as disruptors and think of themselves as changing the old-fashioned way, those are the folks that are more likely to go off a different path with the kind of audio they deliver and with the way they build the car and their opinions and positions about modifying the car.
Well, I don't know if you knew this, and I hope I'm speaking the truth, but this is what I perceive as fact when it comes to Tesla. They don't have traditional dealerships, right? They have service centers. And the reason they did that is so they don't have to release their wiring diagrams and all of that stuff like everyone else does. Because if you're a dealership, you have to have a way to service the vehicle. For your mom and pop shops down the street, you need to have your all data. At some point, all of that information needs to become available. With Tesla, it's pretty much a closed circuit, right?
Yeah,
because
it is, but legally it's not supposed to be. And I think that there's some Tesla vehicles you can now get some repair information from the right because of the Right to Repair Act. But for a long time, Elon,
I've tried to find. It's not on Pro Demand. It's not going to be on Pro Demand. It's not going to be on anything. It's not going to be in any scan tool. They don't release their information to tap into anything that they have.
And that
you got to go through great hoops to figure out anything. And I think it's because they strategically did that to avoid having dealerships and to have service centers. And that was the loophole with the law, that they didn't have to release information.
I think the third-party non-service center repair shops have federal law that protects them, which Tesla is taking advantage of their rock star status to ignore. And no one has held them liable. I always thought the reason that Tesla avoided the dealership network concept was to eliminate the additional layer of dealer markup, because the way that the car business works is that Ford sells the car to the Ford dealer and the Ford dealer sells the car to the end user, and there's a two-step markup process. And there's a lot of technology in a Tesla, and I always figured that they didn't have enough margin in it to step on it twice, and that was why they didn't have the dealer situation. But I do think that the law that is supposed to mandate the right to repair is flouted by Tesla, and no one wants to hold their feet to the fire because they're a rock star right now, and they're making cars in the U.S., and no one wants to say boo to that. I'll have to go back, and I remember seeing a post about somebody saying something about a repair information, and I'll have to go back and see if that was real or horsepucky.
Yeah, but think about it. So the Magnuson-Moss Act, the real reason that was created is so if you have a camshaft position sensor that breaks, you don't have to go back to Audi to buy it, because at that point, they're a monopoly. They could charge whatever they want for that cam position sensor, and you're screwed, right? So that's kind of why that law was put into place, where aftermarket companies can make a sensor that works and functions to the same specs as that sensor, and you can buy it for cheaper to give you a choice to not create a monopoly of that part. Well, with Tesla, they've kind of done that in the full scheme of things, because as far as I know, I can't go to fucking Advanced Auto Parts and buy anything for a Tesla. I have to go to Tesla. And now, to segue, they are making it to where the car can self-diagnose and you can order the part from the car.
Well, I was going to say, I had to go to a Tesla dealer and order. I went to go get a part. So I went to the service center, and it was like, where's the parts counter? And there is no parts counter. It's just a kid. They're like, oh, yeah, I think I can figure out how to order you a part. And it turned out they actually had it in stock. It's something that I guess.
So imagine the car diagnosing itself that the blower motor is bad. It needs a new blower motor. You can order it from the screen. It charges your Tesla account, and then it's going to coordinate a repair technician to come out and fix that. They have completely isolated any avenue in which you can get your car repaired, the part, any of that, through anyone else.
Well, and now you have me to the dealer part, and I'm pretty sure after visiting the Tesla service center and seeing the line around the block, I mean, there's a lot of Teslas around where I live, but I'm pretty sure they isolated the service center from where they sell the cars, because if the people that were buying the cars saw the line of cars to be repaired, they might not be so interested in buying the car.
That's a lot of door handles. That's a lot of door handles and a lot of fishing line in your pocket to get the door handle out. Back in 98, 99, I worked for a company called Vitronics. And Vitronics was the company that invented the scan tool. And the way that the scan tool was invented was Delco was working on the first ECU. And one of their engineers realized that when this car went into the dealership service environment, somebody was going to have to troubleshoot that ECU. And he planned out a device that became the Tech 1. And he took it to Delco and said, we need to make this so the dealerships can troubleshoot this. And Delco said, yeah, well, that's fine, but the volume on that is going to be so low, it doesn't really fit what we do. So we're not going to do it. We're just going to have to send this out to have somebody else do it. And he said, well, could I do it? And it became the first sanctioned spinoff in Delco in GM history, because usually they buy companies. They didn't split them off back then. And they became the company that made the Tech 1, wrote all the software for it to be used as an aftermarket tool and be used by Toyota and Honda and whatever. But they still never got it to the point that we were talking about. And I was hired to come in and work on their in-vehicle program, which was basically instrumenting the vehicle and making it, I won't say a node on the network, because in 98, 99, wireless data was like 14.4. We actually built a modem to get stuff out of the car using the Mobitex modem inside the early Blackberries.
Oh, gosh.
And we instrumented like 50 FedEx trucks, and we got to the point where we could predict where the FedEx trucks were going to break, because we could see all their information all the time, and we could predict when their transmissions were going to fail. And that was a really cool project, but I could see even then that where this whole thing was going was that the car was going to be a node on the internet. It was going to be an IP address. And the OEMs were going to build that capability into the car. There was no place in the long run for a small company like ours. And most of the business in the meantime was going to be with companies like Progressive, who just want to track you so they can figure out if you're a good insurance risk or not. And I said, man, car stereo is a lot more fun than this.
Is that not wild, though, that this is the evolution of what manufacturers are doing? Tesla specifically, that you could be driving your Tesla and it says, hey, you have 60,000 miles. We know that your tires haven't been changed, that you need new tires, and you can order them right now. And they'll be here. A service guy will come and do it like that. That's convenience. That's Amazon.
Well, so that's convenience from a consumer point of view. Think about all of the... I went to a wireless data conference, and they had us work on this business experiment, and they wanted us to find the hidden $1 million. And what we were doing was we were instrumenting all of these Duke Energy field vehicles so that every time somebody used a part off the truck, they wirelessly scanned it, and it came out of inventory, and the customer got billed, and there was no paperwork, and it was instant. And all of us got everything working. We all figured out what needed to happen. And then they said, did you find the $1 million? And we said, no, where's the $1 million? And they said, well, if you remember, every time all these parts went on all the service trucks, they were taken out of inventory and written off at the time. And when we converted to this new system, we got $1 million in parts. Just that appeared out of nowhere. We'd already written off, and we get to sell them again. And it was the weirdest financial fiction ever. But my thinking is, how many parts are in the channel, that in this warehouse, in the stock room, in the distribution center, that you don't need anymore because you have a system that removes all these different places they have to sit and get dusty. We've all sat at the parts counter waiting for the parts guy to get to us so he can go find out what's sitting in the back. And if you can eliminate all of that with data, then I think he's found a great way to remove cost from the chain and put it into the car. Because I think that one of the reasons that Tesla, and I'm not a Tesla owner, and I'm not necessarily a Tesla fanboy, but I think Tesla has had a lot of success in the market. And I think one of the reasons they've had a lot of success is that you do get a lot of cool stuff for the price of the car. And I think that's what pays for it.
It's also relatively basic as far as a car goes. Like, it seems like there's just less moving parts and less stuff to go wrong. And, so it's...
But that is until refined companies like Audi and Porsche and Mercedes, they all catch up. And here's a perfect example is I have a Tesla client who had a Model S, and his whole family has Tesla. And then the Taycan comes out. Well, that piques his interest. Well, guess what? This fucking Taycan is built like a Porsche. Of course it is. The fit and finish is like Porsche. The entertainment system is like Porsche.
Yeah, it's not
and
like
all
a
of the sudden,
Corolla.
yeah, all of the sudden, this car is very comparable to the performance of a Tesla. I would say that Tesla still has, I would say, patents and things about the way the motor works and the acceleration that it's hard for those companies at this point to recreate. But the fit and finish, the luxury, the interior design, because we all know Tesla does not have great interior design. And of the fit and finish, the gaps, the things people complain about is astronomical. The attention to detail just isn't there with Tesla yet because they're a newer company and they haven't done it for X amount of years. But that client gets in a Taycan and he's not looking back, right? He's getting a new Roadster because he is grandfathered into all of the early releases of Tesla based on his loyalty to the company. But right now he's not driving a Tesla. He's driving a Taycan.
And at the other end of the market, Volkswagen Audi Group is also killing it with the ID4 and ID6, not just in the States, but in Europe and I believe in China. They have moved an insane number of ID4s. And they've sold every ID4 they can get in the States. So I think the legacy companies, and I was just doing some work on this, doing some research, and the amount of money that Ford and Volkswagen have committed to this category for tooling and development is dwarfs the smaller companies. Right.
And I think that's another reason why Tesla isn't just a car company. Their real estate is in a lot of different avenues, right? And that's allowing them the ability to create these cars and create everything else, come out with concepts that aren't even reality yet to sell. But at the same time, they're making a lot of different things. And, Audi's just making cars, and that's where their attention is. And this goes back to, to segue back to what we were talking about. Companies dedicate money and their R&D to being the best at something. And at the end of the day, Tesla's, they've created a wide market share in their cars, but they've also done that by creating other different things to have the money to make all this stuff. And at the end of the day, their focus isn't solely on cars. And if it was, you wouldn't see all the gap issues, just the shit that people deal with Tesla that other companies don't deal with.
Hey, as an iPad Pro owner, I'm just glad that they inspired Apple to build the iPad Pro, because I'm really confident that somebody drove their Tesla to infinite loop every day and kept saying, why is this radio bigger than my iPad? And that's how we got the iPad Pro. And one thing we all know about the car business is that cars, it's huge. There are lots of different cars. And hey, people bought Aztecs, for crying out loud. There is a market for almost any car that you can think of. And I have my preferences, and I have the ones I would spend money on. And they're different than the ones that my neighbor would spend money on.
Are you worried about teenagers now, 13, 14, 15-year-olds, about where their ideal expenditures will be when they're 25 to 40 to 50? Do you think it's going to be in cars? Because we all grew up as car people, right? That was our passion when we were 15, 16, coming up in the industry. Like, we had the passion. And I already told you about our key demographic is those ages, right? Well, what about, my daughter when she's older? What about, it's not the same. Is this going to phase out?
At some point, it becomes a luxury. Right. I think we're really close to that right now. when we started Musicar, I didn't realize the end of the pool that we were going to have the greatest success with. And I think I've said this before. I don't remember the venue where I've said it, but and I'm sure you guys have had the question as well when people have wanted to start their own business and wanted to know about how you just came up with the plan. And I said, look, we wanted to fish where no one else was fishing, and this is where no one else was fishing. We didn't necessarily think that this was more ethically pure. We enjoy it more, but we didn't think it was more ethically pure. It turned out that we were offering a luxury that people really, really wanted in a certain demographic. But we didn't do Camrys and Accords. We didn't see Camrys and Accords coming in. And I go back to the 90s where Camrys and Accords were our bread and butter, right? And I was really uncomfortable a little bit with that. And this extended to my interaction with Radar. Because as I mentioned, Tom had a Rolodex of Radar clients that were regular clients when we got together. And he was trying to coach me into how to work with the Radar clients. And I wasn't getting it. I was stupid. It took me quite a while to understand that it really doesn't matter. Like if somebody was buying a 911 Turbo and there's a box that you could check that was for $10,000 and says, I probably won't get a speeding ticket, they would check the box. They wouldn't ask for you to break it down and parse out the cost over a time or compare it to insurance or anything like that. They would, $10,000, probably won't get a ticket. Let me check that box. And once I understood that, I was able to present radar and laser countermeasures in a way that was interesting and that they learned what they wanted to learn. I was doing it with my wallet. And I think that my son is 12. And I think that my son will spend his money on other things. And he will not spend money on his car because his car is what gives him the feeling of agency. Like with my car, I could get in my car and go wherever I wanted. And that felt like freedom. And with my son, he can get online and go wherever he wants. And that feels like freedom. And I'm not saying that they're replacing each other, but he doesn't have the same need to feel agency because he has it in a lot more ways than I did. And so it's just different.
That might have been the greatest answer of any question that I've ever asked on the podcast. Because I was listening to you say that, and my mind was blown when you were ending up where I hoped you would end up.
The other side of that too is that I feel like the three of us are sitting here, and until it popped into my brain, I still envision a car the way I see a car, and I envision a Tesla and more cars looking more like Tesla. But the reality of the situation is that we are, 6 to 10 years away from autonomous cars being all over the road and people not having to sit behind a steering wheel, and our jobs and lives.
And they're not even owning the car.
Completely
it's
different.
It's going to be $200 a month, this car. And it'll still be a bracket, right? If you want a Tesla Model X, it's going to be this to pick you up, whatever. So you're still going to be paying for that. So all the hope in my basket gets thrown into, well, there's still going to be companies that are going to want to deliver an exceptional experience and make it different. And possibly those clients are still going to exist. Because again, what Gary just said is going to be true. And I've heard chatter about Lyft and Uber having autonomous vehicles picking people up on a monthly subscription where people don't have to own cars, don't have to have insurance, don't have to have any of that. Think about how much more money you would have if you didn't have a car payment and you didn't have to pay insurance and you just pay a monthly subscription like everything else.
That speaks to the Accord and Camry category really strongly. I don't think it addresses the sports car and the super premium category because, once again, I think it comes back to agency. I think one of the reasons that those people really want to have radar laser countermeasures is they just don't want to have to stop.
But these are all our demographic and our generations, right? The newer generation is completely different. You're going to have a select few that are going to want to be different because they're going to want the clout, right? But at the same time, I'm thinking about the boy that my daughter goes to, 8th grade or high school with, right? What is he going to drive? Is he going to care about what he drives and the fact that he's going to want that freedom? The same, is he going to want to spend money on that versus anything else? This is what we're used to. We grew up with this.
I don't know what the percentage is like. I mean, the folks that are in the age range that you talked about, who are our customers now, I don't know what the share is like compared to what the share will be like in the future. I assume that it's going to be similar. I think that feeling of agency and luxury is going to continue. But I'm not sure. I think that it's going to continue. But I don't know if it is. When I'm talking about the gender mix for audio, the way I usually explain it is that women can hear their favorite song and they can hear it on a crappy AM radio and it's their favorite song and it's going to often make them happy. And for many men, when we hear our favorite song on a subpar playback system, it is a frustrating experience. And that is how we know that women are fundamentally better adjusted than men. And that maladjustment is what we've all been, surfing for our careers in this industry. So I don't think that humans are going to suddenly become that much better adjusted. But I do think that my son is more likely to, go surfing in Costa Rica than he is to own something.
But our homes will always exist. Our homes will always be a sense of freedom, right? We're always going to have our private domicile as our home. But the car, for people growing up in the world where you're just looking at your phone, you're tuned out with the world, you're in this space connected with everyone else. When you're in a car, if you can pay $150, $200 a month to ride share, and you don't have to worry about anything,
you don't have
getting
to look
in
up
an
from
accident.
your phone.
Yeah, you can just sit there, chill. That's what people do on the metro. When that becomes an option with the car, why wouldn't this youngest generation adapt to that? And what if everyone adapts to that, right? Obviously, we're all going to die at some point, and this new generation is going to come through and be the deciding factor of what an automobile is.
I'll tell you the objection that I have heard so far is that, what do you do in an emergency? What happens if there's a fire? What happens, owning a car, not owning a car, at least for the Southern California crowd, is going to take a few generations to breed that out of us.
That's our mindset, though. But the youngest generation, that's not going to be their mindset.
Yeah. We have a good friend of our family whose son is in college right now, and his dad bought a used cord for him to take to school, and he said, "No thanks. I don't want to take a car to school. I don't want to deal with the hassle," which was very progressive for him. Blew my mind because it's a free car. What are you doing? And then when you're in college, you can do that. You don't need a car in a big campus where everybody's within walking distance. But I think that at a certain point in earnings, there may be a change, but we will have to see. I'm just glad that headphones can't play bass.
Very accurate statement. Because all the people that we asked on the podcast, how did you get into audio? It always started with a tweeter, except I think maybe Andy Waymeyer was the exception.
Always started with the woofer. You said tweeter, but
oh yeah. What I meant was with Andy, I think we got to the point where he liked maybe the highs instead of bass. And I was like, we've never had anyone that said that. Because it always started with subs. I heard a sub and I was hooked and I was interested, and then I did education and I wound up working in the industry. It's pretty much how every story goes.
Yeah, I think I'm the only one that was afraid of tint.
Yeah, but crawling up under a dashboard with alarms sounds like fun too.
Oh gosh. I went to Best Buy to pick up a part 5 years ago, and it was in the back at the road shop, and I went back there and I was talking with the manager of the install bay, and I called it a road shop. That's a Circuit City term, not a Best Buy term. But he said, yeah, they don't do the training program they used to do, but I was like one of the last ones that went through the training program. And I said, really? And he says, yeah, I've got the training book right here. And he pulls it out, and it's the second edition of the MECP study guide, the pre-Matt Schaeffer MECP study guide. And it's the one with the blue picture of the guy with the coveralls. And I said, really? Open that up to page 3. And he opened it up to page 3. And there's a list of all the contributors to that book. And I said, there's 12 names there. There's me and 11 guys that got out of the industry. And I'm the one that
tough.
There was no chair left for me. So I don't know. The future has some technological barriers. What will work in the car? Who will buy it for the car? Who will own the car and want to buy it? We have the sales barrier that you talked about, Matt, where a reliable and dependable salesperson who gets audio system design is a tough person to find. And it's not just in our category. I have a friend who's in the bicycle business, and he was amazed that I was helping him put some groups together in the bicycle business. I'm not a bicycle expert. He says, why are you good at this stuff? And I said, I don't know. It's just building systems. And he says, yeah, but most of our guys can't do it. And apparently a lot of moving parts is hard for folks to navigate. I've been doing this for 34 years, and I like to tell people that the classes that I teach, I couldn't teach if I was only using what I knew after the first 20 years. Because after the first 20 years, I didn't know hardly any of this stuff. I knew 3dB was twice the power. There, we're done. That's what I knew. And I didn't know what an up mixer was, and I didn't know, understand phase at all. Now, I can teach people things that I didn't know. But the number of folks who get audio as opposed to being able to change a head unit, that's a pinch in the garden hose right now. Not 5 or 10 years down the road. Like right now, we have that pinch in the garden hose. And I have a model that I've used internally with Electromedia, and I've asked a lot of people this question, and I'd love to ask you guys this question. If you take all the installers in the United States and you put them into one of 3 buckets, and you got the green light bucket, and the green light bucket is you give these folks an audio task and they can complete it. You give them an OE integration task, or you ask them to tune a vehicle and they can complete the task. And then you've got the yellow light bucket. And the yellow light bucket is folks that can handle some of this. They can add subs. They can do some OE integration. Some OE integration, they have to call for help. They have to get some assistance. And tuning the car, they'd probably rather somebody else tune the car, but they can do a little. And then we have the red light bucket, which I jokingly say are the people that can change the head unit if the wire colors on the head unit harness and the wire colors on the harness that plugs into the car all match up, then they can change the head unit. And that's obviously an exaggeration. That's a bit hyperbole. So if you were going to take those 3 and put all of the installers in the country into one of those 3 buckets, and I'm not going to ask you guys to do that on the air because I think that would be unfair, but you probably don't have as many people in the green bucket as would be healthy for our industry.
I would assume that most are going to be between red and yellow.
And that is the consensus with most of the people that I've talked to. There have been a few folks who suffered from irrational exuberance. But the biggest problem is that we have too low of a number in the green bucket, And we have a number of companies all trying to fit product that requires a green light installer to install. And they're trying to fit it through a channel where that part of the toothpaste tube is very, very small and it spills over. And what happens is, like you were talking about, Gary, is that we get that product being put in by a yellow light or a red light guy, and it's above his pay grade, so to speak. I don't know what he gets paid, but it's above his level of skill. And the result isn't what anybody wants. It's not what the manufacturer wants for their brand. It's not what the consumer was hoping for. The person who did it didn't have a satisfactory experience, usually trying to figure it out. It's a lose-lose-lose deal. And so you were asking me about my title. And so one of the conversations I had with my boss was, what's my focus? And my focus at my job is to help the yellow light guys, get to green. That's the urgent part of my job, is to help the yellow guys get to green, where they can knock off the rough edges and they can handle more different cars and they can solve more problems.
And real quick, sorry to interrupt. Is the approach to that to have bolstered technical support and predetermined outcomes, a la you spent time at direct text type information?
Oh God, we ruined the industry with that in the end, didn't we?
Well, hey, you know what? You know what started it? Acrylic windowed bandpass boxes, right? You don't need to understand how a subwoofer works. You put any woofer in this box and you have bass. It's the stupidification of installers, and it started in the late 80s, and it started with the splatter painted of the inside acrylic windowed bandpass box. And you know what I'm talking about. And direct text, if I have to do a car and I need to find a wire, it's one of the first places I'm looking, right? Like anybody who doesn't use that information that's available to them is making their life difficult. But my question to you from the manufacturing and technical support side of it is, when you go to get those installers from yellow to green, is it going to be a blunt force training effort, or is it going to be let's get a better source of information, a better pool of information to help make these guys' jobs easier, or a combination of the two?
That's a great question. And I'm off the clock, so my question
sorry.
I'm just trying to hedge my bets here. This is a Ken Ward answer, not necessarily Electromedia answer.
100%. I get it. Sorry to put you in that spot.
The training that we've done for 40 years is we parachute in, the rep picks us up at the airport, we go to the store, the rep orders the pizza, we talk for 2 hours, and we leave. And that isn't how mechanics get trained, and that isn't how anybody gets trained except for our guys, really. And it hasn't resulted in the results we all need. Okay, it flat out hasn't. I like to do it. I like to go visit. I think it's an important way for the manufacturer to get information and feedback from the channel, but it doesn't effectively raise their technical competence. Electromedia is looking at ways that we probably wouldn't have thought of pre-COVID as early, but we're looking at ways to use technology that to decentralize the training mechanism. We're looking at, and I can't get into specifics because somebody would probably be pretty unhappy with me, but I've been involved in testing and evaluating ways to be able to come, because Electromedia is literally an international company. They have distributors in like 80 countries in the world. And so they have to be able to take some information and disseminate it in multiple languages. And if you think about it, and I've been a product manager in the past, and if you're going to launch a complex product and then 6 months later you're going to look at the sales of that complex product and decide if it's being a success or not, wouldn't it be good to have a handle on how many people were trained on it and how many of them passed the test at the end and how many of them are certified on that product, so that you can decide why the results are what they are? And that right there is the model that all the manufacturers have right now is they have somebody that can parachute in and give a good talk. And it doesn't change anybody's life. And that's one of the reasons I started doing the checklists for the OE class at Knowledge Fest, because I said, look, you come in here and you hear me tell some old jokes that I've told 100 times, and you go home and you don't do anything different. You have to take this piece of paper and you have to use it the next time you touch a car to do something different, or this is a waste of your time. And taking that principle and leveraging it. And you'll see that next year, and you'll understand some of what I'm talking about, because with some product launches that we do next year, we're not going to be relying just on pizza. I didn't mean to do the Italian thing. That was an accident. It just came out. But
I mean, that's a great analogy. Anytime a rep comes, you order pizza, and it's exactly how you just described it for the most part. I mean, that's what it is. And the problem is again, with manufacturers doing things differently with DSP, and the majority of our industry not understanding DSP or how to, and I brought this exact scenario up on a prior podcast, is you can go through Andy's process or Ken's process as a young tech, but there are things that are going to happen where you think that you're following a checklist, and then you get in the car and something's out of phase. Or unless you have that reference or the ability to be like, okay, instantly, I know both your mid-bass are out of phase because I can localize both mid-bass really quickly. Your time alignment's correct. You did all these different things, but I know your mid-bass are out of phase. And I can tell that in 2 seconds because I have the reference. He thinks he did everything right because he went through the checklist. But at the end of the day, you got to have the reference and the understanding of what it should sound like to understand something's wrong.
Sounds like experience, Matt.
Yeah.
Well,
but that's the problem.
Well,
Andy
has a phrase that I really like, and that is that shortcuts are for experts. And I'm an expert. We're all experts. And there are things that we can do because of our experience that we would not instruct a green. And see, I'm mixing my color metaphor, but we wouldn't instruct a brand new person to try to do what we know how to do. There was an assumption in what you said that I'm going to politely disagree with slightly, because my checklists are pretty good. And so I just did a training. That's why I was a couple of minutes late to our call tonight. I was doing a training for some people in Alabama, and I was walking them through the part on the checklist that says check for polarity on all your speakers, and why you check for polarity on all your speakers, and do you have a polarity tester? And if you don't have a polarity tester, here's how you can do it, which is going to really suck on this Audi S5 that you have as the demo car here, because you're going to have to get in the back seat. And it sucks to get in and out of the back seat of an Audi S5, but walking them through that sort of thing, not so that they never make the mistake, because we're all going to make that mistake, but that they can swim out of the well when they fall in. And it is absolutely a process. You do have to have a process that you can follow that will get you success most of the time. I'll give you an example, and I think this will speak to you, Matt, and I think that we all can understand this. And I will put it on my shoulders. I won't put it on anybody else's. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I didn't understand what Bose was doing in 911s. It was about 5 years ago when I figured it out. 6 years ago, I didn't get it. And we had a customer come in, and we did a system in a 911, and I tuned the car, and following the process I used at the time, which is not the process I use now. And Nick Aiken went and listened to the car and came back and said, something's out of phase. And I said, no, nothing's out of phase. And I went back and I said, what song did you listen to? And he told me what song he listened to. So I went back and I listened to that song, and I made some changes. And I said, there, go listen to it now. And he went and listened to it, and he said, no, something's still out of phase. I said, did you listen to the same song? He said, no, I listened to a different song. I said, damn it, would you listen to the same song? And we did this until the customer showed up, just like Andy's old joke. We did this till the customer showed up. And it turned out that Bose equalizes phase on most of the channels of most of their systems. And I didn't have a sufficient understanding of that. And I didn't know how to look for it. And when I did look for it, I was using a test track with uncorrelated pink noise, which is a poor way to expose phase problems between two channels if they're left and right. And I was just setting myself up for failure all the way around. So let's take that off of my shoulders for a minute, where I ran into something I didn't understand. At that time, I was already one of the premier experts on OEM integration, and I didn't know anything about what Bose was doing. So how many manufacturers who touch cars a lot less often than I do, who touch cars a lot less often than we do, knew what Bose was doing? And how many of them were passing out instructions that were appropriate within one universe, but they weren't appropriate in the Bose universe? If you start summing channels together without the right precautions in the Bose universe, you get a ridiculous result. You may have followed the checklist that you have, but if the checklist that you have was created in too narrow of a environment, then you've got a problem.
But I think that's where my example falls, is in the moment in which you're like, no, it's right because I followed this checklist, but you had the reference of Nick in that scenario to be like, no, it can't be right. Right? I think we fall into that trap too much. And you got to understand, a lot of the people following the checklist are going to be people without a reference because they're doing this checklist, or they don't have their own, I feel like I've said this in the past, that I have this hybrid way to tune based on what you teach, what Andy teaches, what Nick teaches, like what all these different people teach. And I've combined them together to find my own way to do something, right?
Hey, kids at home, don't do that.
Yeah, I'm just speaking for myself. The people following a checklist, if they don't have a reference, they might fall into a scenario where they think they did everything correct, but at the end of the day, they might have an issue. And it has to take somebody like Nick to hear it and understand there's an issue.
Well, I'm going to
I know what I'm saying is I'm going against a checklist, but at the same time, I'm saying a checklist with a checklist accompanied with reference is where we know everything is correct.
So,
and I'm not trying to put you in that position. I'm just saying, from somebody who watches another tech at their work who doesn't have the same reference or experience, try and follow the checklist. I often find scenarios in which I get in the car and I understand that there's issues.
Okay.
Much like when Nick listened to that car.
Well, first off, I'm going to say that I have to praise Matt, because although he uses the goulash method of checklists, he never calls us and asks us why it doesn't work, because he knows he made his own. And one of the things that happens a lot when we teach a process is we get people saying your process didn't work, and then we find out a lot of the time they didn't follow the process. They followed a different process.
And I agree with that. I agree with that.
And that's a tough one. Now, at Musicar, we had a policy which Tom and I put into place when we started, and I believe it is still the case. I can't say for sure. But no car was allowed to pull out until two people had listened to it. So
that's a good process.
What I listened to didn't expose the imaging problem at the frequency that we had. I actually have a screenshot of it. I have a screenshot of it because when the car, we actually measured it afterward at a later point. But the belt and suspenders was intended to make sure that we didn't miss that sort of thing. And that was also part of our process. The ninth part was the ninth step is listening to music. And so I would say that our company process worked because it didn't go out the door. Now, that said, historically, how many Bose systems in our industry are summed and shipped today? Right?
I hope none.
I hope none, but I know better. And as you know, like the Educar magazine, for the trade magazine online, we've had an article for a few months on how to do that vehicle without a preamp, because sometimes the preamps have been thin on the ground. I think that the one preamp for 2019 and up was available and isn't at the moment, and nobody has launched a replacement at all. So those are things where I'm going to step back to DirectX for a moment. Our thought in technical, when we created TechSoft, which was the forerunner for DirectX, which involved a 3.5 millimeter floppy and 4 rep visits a year to update your database. And that,
what happened to the wait? I'm old school. We had the number we called, and it would fax it to us.
That worked off the same database, but we actually had this TechSoft thing where we could come install the database. And that database, we actually put in there a fake car out of Road and Track. It was the Denbei Super Chauvinist, I think, to see if anybody knocked off our database. We would know because a fake car was in there. But our idea was to help the pros go faster. Like you were talking about, hey, if it's there, I want to use that tool. What ended up happening was, from a manufacturer point of view and from a sales rep point of view, was the direction to go find unqualified shops and sell them product and let tech support get them through it. And I think audio is there right now. I think that there is better audio product available now than ever before. I know there's classic Alpine groups where everybody loves the green lights, but those guys who love the green lights want to put a 3311 underneath their DIN hole and have an old analog EQ that was noisy and didn't have separate left and right just because they want to have the sliders. They're not actually about the better sound. Our equipment that's available to us sounds better than anything in the past 40 years. The channel isn't uniformly able to deliver the promise of the product. Part of the strategy to address that has to be get them started. Like, I can't go to a dealer and in 2 hours take them from red to green. I can't take them from somebody who knows how to crimp to somebody that can listen and say one of your mid basses is hooked up backwards. I can start the process, right? And that's what some shops expect. Hey, we decided we want to get into this business. Let me call the rep and tell them we want a training. Well, I'm a doctor, Jim, not a travel agent. And we're not going to be able to get you there in one big lift. But to speak to the checklist idea for a moment, there's a book called The Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande, Dr. Atul Gawande. And he wrote an article for The Atlantic, which became the book. And the article in The Atlantic was about Johns Hopkins ER. And you live pretty close to Johns Hopkins, I think. You're not too far from Johns Hopkins. And at the time, the infection rate when you go to the ER, a lot of people get an IV. And sometimes you get an infection at the side of the IV. And at Johns Hopkins, the average was 11%. And the national average was 4%. So that's almost 3 times worse than the national average. So somebody at Johns Hopkins said, we have to fix this. Put fist on the table. And what they came up with was twofold. They put the checklist of all the things you're supposed to do next to each bed in the ER. I'm pretty sure wash your hands stupid was the first one. And they gave all the nurses the explicit ability to tell the doctor, stop, you forgot to do this, which, as you know, culturally is a big deal for some doctors to have something like that said publicly. And when they did this pilot program, the checklist on the wall, they went from 11% to 0. They didn't go from 11% to 4. They went from 11% to 0. So the other story that I love with checklists has to do with the B-17, because the B-17, when it was a prototype, crashed and burned and killed one of Boeing's top test pilots. And the remaining top test pilot at Boeing said that the plane was too much for one man to fly. And the way that they made the Boeing, the B-17 flyable was a clipboard with a checklist on it. Now, that doesn't mean that those guys weren't excellent pilots, and it doesn't mean that the doctors in the ER are not great doctors. It doesn't mean that they're in there using a YouTube video to figure out how to, intubate somebody. But it means that they're using a tool. So I absolutely agree that the tool without the expertise and the tool without the understanding is insufficient to get us there. But it's a lever. To me, it's a lever. And we can start saying, okay, we've got to get some of the yellow crew over to the green light bucket, and we're going to use this lever and everything else we can find to get them there. So that's kind of my two cents on it.
My point wasn't to discredit the checklist by any means. Obviously, every instruction manual has some sort of a checklist, an instruction to set something up, right? That's obviously the most imperative part of any process. I think my biggest point was the biggest problem that I see working in the field is that the person applying that checklist doesn't have an adequate reference to understand if what they did at the end of the day was correct or not. Because Gary and I have said numerous times that we can get into a car and within 5 seconds you understand if it's pretty close or correct.
If it's near its potential.
Right.
I think that is the biggest problem for people who follow a checklist. I wish it was the biggest problem in our industry, but I think the biggest problem in our industry is people who are making it up because they haven't been given any guidance at all, or they haven't been given compelling guidance. But yes, once you get past I hooked up all the wires and I had some left over. I'll give you an example. We had a guy come in to our shop with a Audi S5, and he said, I've been back to the shop where I got all this stuff a few times. I have two 12-inch subs and a 1,000-watt amp, and then I have a 4-channel amp and a 3-way set up front. I only care about 2 genres. I care about old school rap and I care about old school hip hop. And I said, well, you must care about them a lot because I can't even resolve the difference between old school rap and old school hip hop. So you are really dialed in. And I listened to his car and I said, he says, I don't like the bass. I got 2 12s and a 1,000-watt amp and I don't like the bass. And I'm like, okay, I'll listen to it. I said, yeah, I don't like the bass either. So I put in a pink noise track and I test the RCA going into a subwoofer, and the sub bass is missing from the signal going into the subwoofer. So I tell him, look, we got to take your car apart and we're going to pull it into the bay and we're going to do some testing. And I get to his DSP, and his DSP had 4 channels of input, and it was a B&O system. So 2 of the 4 channels were the mids and highs, which are channel. 2 of the channels were the front mid woofers. The subwoofer channel was cut, taped off, and lying on the floor of the trunk. Guy wanted old school rap, old school hip hop, 1,000 watts, 2 12s, no subwoofer channel. So, gosh, I wish that guy had something, right? And he'd been back 3 times. So, any one of us, like, that didn't take very long for me to diagnose. The hardest part was taking the car apart because, as you know, I'm not really good at that sort of thing. That sort of thing there, where the shop wanted him, somebody at the shop wanted him to have what he wanted, but the shop didn't have the structural integrity all the way through to deliver what they said they would. They didn't have the performance capability to deliver what they said they would. And we as an industry have the tools to overcome that. We don't always know how to use them, right? So I know that the last year and a half have been a tough time to be in the occupation of teaching car stereo installers new things, because car stereo installers have often been up to here in the United States with work that they had to do. That's a difference between the United States and the rest of the world. The rest of the world hasn't necessarily seen a peak in car stereo installations during the pandemic. So everybody's exhaling a little bit. The tide's going out a little bit. And hopefully more people have the opportunity to say, hey, I need to take stock and really elevate my game. And I'm pleased to say that after some presentations that we did with dealers who had not embraced DSP, that I've had some dealers contact me or contact our company and ask for guidance because they were finally deciding they needed to enter the category. And
is it because they listen to the podcast?
I'm sure it was because they listened to the podcast. I think that the podcast is insufficiently credited with the car audio boom in this country. Coincidence? I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, out of anyone, I think people like you have the greatest handle of where our industry actually sits. Because for me, it's perception. From Gary, it's perception. But you are set out into the field, literally training all sorts of dealers, right? So you're going to come in contact with people from every fit and finish. We just know the people who are impacted in our industry and involved in our industry, but you are sent out to all the dealers as far as I know. So you're going to see firsthand where we stand as an industry.
Yeah. I think that we have shops that are in business that are, as a business, are run well enough to be a going concern. And we want to give those guys the tools to improve their deliverable, even if they're not looking to be audiophile shops. And that's kind of the direct text. What we did at direct text is those guys were a pickup. And then there are the experts, and you guys know this. I mean, the experts are booked out now, right? I mean, you're booked out, Matt. You're booked out, Gary. I mean, you have jobs on the books that are waiting for you because of your expertise. And I know the guys at Educar are booked out. I think they're booked out into 2022 right now. And so what that tells me is that there are more people, and I'm sure some of them are listening to the podcast, there are more people out there who want this deliverable than the channel knows how to deliver yet. Or that wouldn't be a backlog at the places that really do have the capability. So I feel good about that. And I feel good that some folks come to me and say, hey, we deliver better systems because you've helped us sort some of this out. I think that there will always be the folks that will take it to the level that you guys and Tom and I and a handful of others who we know take it. And it's one of the reasons that you don't want to assume that you know what's going on from tech support. Or even tech support groups on social media, because I will meet people at shops and at conventions who I've never heard of before, who come up and say, hey, I search the group all the time and I find the answers I want and they're really helpful. And that is worth a dozen head unit replacement questions that I have to go police, because the head unit replacement questions make me think, oh gosh, doesn't anybody read the rules of the group? And by the way, all you consumers who are listening, it's a pro group, so we actually have to have a shop that you work at to get in. Sorry. There are people out there who don't call tech support and who don't complain and who sort out how things work, who we don't realize they're out there. It's hard to measure how many of them there are.
I have one more question. From what I see, things in Europe are different than they are here. You're obviously connected into that a little more these days, right? But my understanding is that over there, there's a lot of restrictions on modifications to the cars, and you can't cut wires and you can't cut holes in doors. And there's a lot of stuff that basically would fail a car from inspection, was the way it was told to me. I don't know how accurate that is, but that has driven a lot of plug-and-play solutions for amplified systems, where they're removing either a factory amp or unplugging head unit's connection to the speakers and putting in an amplifier system with digital sound processing in between. Do you think, is that the roadmap for here, or do you see that happening or being more popular here? Because I don't see a lot of availability for those types of systems here, although there are a few.
I think that a number of manufacturers have put their toe in the water there, and the level of commitment has been a lot greater for European solutions than it has been for US solutions. I think if you look at a number of manufacturers, including the one that I work for, you see a renewed investment in that activity. And in my mind, the reason for that is if we want to have an installed system that has better judgment applied as it's installed, can we do that up front and reduce the dependency on expertise at the end? And I think that given all the talk we've talked about, that as far as the skills of the channel, that some manufacturers are going to bring out some products that don't require the level of expertise. Now, I have heard mixed reports about the cutting wires. I know that some folks in the Pacific Rim have told me that they don't want to cut the wires, whether it's a problem or not. I've heard in some countries outside of Europe that they have the same sort of thing where they feel there's a potential problem with the warranty with cutting wires. Traditionally, European systems have not been that portable to the States. BMW and Mercedes are a really good example because most BMW and Mercedes base audio packages have not been available in the US for most of the past 25 years. I mean, if you look at BMW base audio, it was available in the E30, and then it wasn't available again until 2010, which was a horrible mistake, and then it went away again. And but in Germany, BMW upgrade products have to work in base audio because that's like 80% of the upgraded cars in Germany have base audio. So the product that works in Europe often doesn't work here. Obviously, they're not going to give us a lot of great Dodge Ram solutions over there, although I guess it's a FCA car. So when I was there last time, I did see an awful lot of Jeeps. There are vehicles that are big in the U.S. market. You know, I don't think there's any Silverados or Sierras with Bose in the European market that you know, I talked to them about Bose and they're like, really? What do they do? So I think that there has to be a commitment to U.S. models with vehicle specificity. And if you look at whether it's Chris Pate's company with subwoofer enclosures that really are the linchpin of a lot of people's upgrade in their truck, or you look at Musicar's offerings for BMW and now Porsche, or you look at some of the fly-by-night, I guess fly-by-night's not the right word, but you look at some companies like Taco Tunes who sell just not well-engineered upgrades for Toyota. And then you look at companies like Sandy's company, OEM Audio Plus, that Ricky is working for. Those solutions seem to be incredibly engineered. So there's a spectrum there, and those solutions are attractive to the consumer for the same reason that talking to Gary or talking to Matt is attractive to a consumer. When a consumer talks to you guys, it's obvious that you know their vehicle and you have expertise. And when somebody knows the car and they feel like they're going to a specialist for that car, that reassures them a great deal. Now, they can't tell the difference between Taco Tunes actually knowing anything about audio. And if so, you know, I don't mean to bag on Taco Tunes, but I can't tell that they actually have any experience with audio. They figured out where the bolt holes are on a Tacoma pretty well.
I have to keep my mouth shut as someone who does a lot of Tundras. So
I developed a Tacoma kit with Electromedia, and it finally came to market right about the time that we were always selling out of every component that went in the kit. So we haven't sold hardly any of the kits, but it's the only kit I know of for that car that takes into account the phase processing that's in the factory head unit. And I don't know anybody else's that takes that into account. the fact of the matter is that kit couldn't be developed in Europe because there is no Tacoma there. It's a Hilux, and there's hardly any of them in Europe, and it's a totally different vehicle. Yeah.
So I will end with my last questions. 3 of them. I'll just shoot them all out at the same time, and then you can answer in sequence. What's your best piece of advice that you would give to a green installer, right? So somebody who's 20 to 25 trying out our industry and possibly with the aspiration to make a career out of it. Second would be, what's the best piece of advice you would give to any salesman in our industry? And this could be most salesmen that are out there. No age requirement. And then what's the best piece of advice you would give to any owner who owns a shop in our industry?
I think the biggest thing for a green installer is to put a DSP in their own car and to engage in it with it right away. And I think that they shouldn't try to be Matt Schaeffer right away. I think that what they should do is they should take my process or Andy's process or Sage's process, and they should exhaust it before they start knocking the VIN number off with thermite and trying to make a new one. And they should get their arms around that in their own car, because if they can't get past that, then they know they need to figure out another career path, because that is where they're going to go. That is the future. For salespeople, and I'm trying to remember who I had a conversation with this about. Was it Zach out at Jeremy's? But there's a handful of salespeople that tune cars. There's me, there's Nick Aiken, there's Zach, and I can't think of, there might be one, I can't remember who the others are. But my advice to a salesperson is figure out how to tune a car.
That is a great piece of advice.
Gosh, that'd make my life easier.
That is a great piece of advice because, again, just to go in things that I've seen, I have seen a job that one of my installers got from a salesman in which they were trying to put a 5-channel VXI into a Jaguar with Meridian.
Oh,
Yep. I had somebody contact me about a Jaguar with Meridian, and I was able to nip that in the bud. But yeah, that was actually one of the examples I used recently. Was you sell a 5-channel amp front and rear in a sub in a Civic, and it turns out to have a 10-channel DTS upmix fully active system in it. And you're like,
that's my point. Civic. You can't assume or just throw a piece of equipment that you think's going to work. If you could understand the signal and understand how to tune a car and how all of this actually integrates and works, you'd be so much more prosperous at sales.
So your third question was, what advice would I give a shop owner? And my advice to a shop owner is there are merchants and there are integrators. And integrators take disparate, and I'm almost quoting verbatim the old Wikipedia definition. It may not be the same definition anymore because it's Wikipedia. So Gary might have changed it when I wasn't looking. Integrators are responsible for taking product from disparate suppliers and making it work together as a whole. And that is what all of us do. When we're doing systems, we take products that are not necessarily a closed system. Like Alpine's coming out with this $30,000 system that's supposed to be a closed system, right? Okay, great. But that's not how most of our systems are. Most of our systems are designed off of the shelf, even with a supplier like us. And I guess I stepped in it a little bit. Electromedia makes a ton of different products. You can build an entire system from Electromedia, but you can build 12 different systems for Electromedia with all the products that they make for the same car. My point is, you can be a merchant, you can be an integrator. An integrator doesn't do as many tickets as a merchant, but the average is significantly higher. A merchant does a lot more transactions with an average that is significantly lower. Amazon's a merchant. I really don't want to pick a fight with Amazon. I would rather go over to an end of the pond where Amazon isn't going to be able to operate for some significant time frame, and take responsibility for the deliverable. And I think, right, to give us the circle back to the beginning, we were talking at the beginning about somebody who has the car and has done the research and cares about the outcome. And you've probably seen me say this on social media, and this probably bugs you as much as it bugs me. When somebody says, I don't want that customer because that customer is too picky. And I say, oh my gosh, give me that customer, because I want a customer that cares a lot. Because I'm going to care more than they do. No matter how much they care, I'm still going to care more. And that's the one that I know will appreciate it. Give me that guy. My advice to the shop owner is be very clear. Are you an integrator? Are you a merchant? And is that who you want to be?
That was an A+ answer, Ken Ward. We will absolutely end on that because I don't think it could get better than that. And I just want to point out to the people listening that I've been watching Ken Ward this whole time with a mini flathead in his hand because it's just second nature. I feel like he picked it up before the podcast to get into fight mode.
I actually have them here in my pen cup, and this one's obviously a lot older than this one because it's faded. But
it's just second nature. You're just holding it around,
I'm going to adjust the gain. You got to. Well,
I love it. I've just been seeing that come into the screen every now and then. I wanted to comment on it, but I didn't want to break up what you were saying. But that's hilarious.
Thanks for noticing.
My glasses might be a little dirty, but the whole time I kept seeing Bill Murray with a gain adjustment screwdriver.
That's what happens. When I was younger, I got Tom Hanks, and then I got David Letterman, and now I get Bill Murray. That's the definition of decrepit, I think, right there.
I'd roll with it.
I'll take it. Well, thanks for having me, guys. Gary, did you have any final questions that you want to put in there?
I mean, I think we covered some stuff. I don't think this is going to be your last time on the show, if that helps for anything. But yeah, I think that's a good round, and I love the insight and the view, and especially now that you're working with the guys overseas, it helps us kind of see the world in a different view and outside our own little boxes that Matt and I live in.
Yeah, I mean, you offer a very unique and great perspective based on the fact that you spend a lot of time working in high-end audio with very picky clients, and really this is the future of where we're all going. And then now you're also now working on the retail side of it, and also educating a lot of the people who need to understand how to utilize this equipment. So, I mean, there's not many people that have that same type of background to the point where you can use it the way that you use it.
Experience and perspective. And
Yep.
All those bases covered. Matt, I will add, I'm going to answer part of your question too that you proposed to Ken. My suggestion for those green installers that are taking Ken's advice and putting a DSP in their car is find a mentor. Find somebody who's done it before, somebody who's good at it, whether it's somebody that works at your shop or another shop, or if you've got to hunt down a car audio competition, whether it's a Mecca event or whatever it is, go find people that do this a lot and soak up the information. No, we don't meet a lot of a-holes in car audio, right? There's a few. But for the most part, everybody's willing to share their knowledge and their experience and let you hear their cars. And it's a sense of pride to show it off and to pass that knowledge along. So my suggestion to those green guys, newbies or guys that don't have a lot of experience, is find somebody who's done it before and does it a lot and ask them for help.
The one caveat that I would like to put in there, and I think that we've all seen this, is that a lot of people in car audio want to be experts and present themselves as such. And I think what you want to look for is somebody who's done it professionally, because I think all of us are going to have to figure out which instructions work and which people really had the goods and which people were kind of making it up as they went along. It's unfortunate, but it does sometimes happen that people really want to be seen as experts. And I've done it myself. At any rate, if you can find an expert and you can find a mentor, that is great, and it will be a big shortcut for you. I'm depressed at how many people contact me and say I can't find anybody. I think that's one of the reasons for the popularity of things like Knowledge Fest is that people are really thirsty for a source that they can't find the rest of the time.
Yeah. We'll have to make the car audio Big Brother program. The DSP Big Brother program.
Yeah, that's a thought. Well, thanks a lot, guys. I am going to go have dinner now because my training ran long before.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We had talked about this last week, and you just did a training before this, so thank you for your time.
Thanks for fitness.
I got to the point where I discovered they hadn't updated the software before we started, and so I became IT guy for about 20 minutes.
Gosh.
And that was the 20 minutes where my frozen pizza was really going to play a key role in my day. But hey, we're in car audio. We are flexible on when we eat. Right?
We're used to it. We're used to pizza for dinner from the reps.
All right.
Yeah,
guys.
and we're sorry. These conversations are never short, but they're always like a phone call, and before you know it, you're talking for an hour and 15 minutes on a phone.
I really enjoyed it.
2.5 hours.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. It did not feel like 2.5 hours, and I really thank you guys for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Ken. See ya.
Take care.
Bye.